We're in perhaps the most famous cemetery in western Pennsylvania. It's the Evans City Cemetery because back in 1967, George Romero and a crew came here to do his first movie called Night of the Living Dead. And that's become a classic. It's called a zombie movie, a ghoul movie. It started a whole new genre in movies. And one of the people from Evans City now, who was here from the very, very beginning and part of that movie in many different aspects, was Gary Striner. And Gary, that was a long time ago. Do you remember
Seems like
vividly what
forever.
happened that time?
Oh, every inch of it.
How
Yes.
did you get involved?
Well, first of all, my brother Russ Striner, who was Johnny in the film, was partners with George Romero, and they had a company called The Latent Image, and I started working in summers at school, coming in and so on and so forth, and next thing you know, there's a rumor floating that we're going to shoot a movie. Well, of course, I was thrilled about that. I had graduated by that time. I was probably, when it all started, I was probably about 19. When we were actually shooting, I was probably 20.
How was Evans City selected as the site for it, and what did you know about the script itself?
Well, Evans City was chosen because we had an intern at Image 10, and he overheard conversations that he kind well, I mean, it wasn't secretive. He knew what kind of a movie it was and knew what we needed in the way of a very remote farmhouse. And sure enough, we came up and took a look at it. And he was from the area here, or knew about the area, and next thing you know, we come up. The farmhouse was perfect. It was a house that was going to be torn down anyway, so we didn't have to worry about putting holes in the walls and the frames and all the boarding up and so on and so forth that we had to do. So it was perfect. So once we knew where the farmhouse was, we knew we had to find a cemetery close by, because those were our two principal locations.
Did you have any idea at that point how gigantic this movie was to become and to set a whole new movie genre?
Never, never. I mean, we obviously had ambitions and expectations and desires, but there's no way you could ever imagine this.
Do you think George Romero himself envisioned anything like this?
No. We wanted to do a good, scary movie. That was the plan. And we had seen some, Channel 11 at the time, WIIC, had started running, this is even before Chilly Billy, had started running horror films. And my brother and George actually watched the first one. They bought 5 horror films, and they watched the first one and looked at one another and said, well, we could do that, and history in the making.
Now, what made this so different? They say it's a different genre. Tell us what that really means and what made it so different.
Well, it was, I guess the antagonist became different. Ghouls, that's what we called them. There was never a reference to zombie back then. They were called ghouls. And, these ghouls were proactive. I mean, you had creatures before. You had Frankenstein and Godzilla, and you had those type of things, but these were actually humans that came back to life. And of course, at that point in time, nobody knew really what their state of life was actually. Where are they truly alive, or we know that they're slow moving and not quite as articulated as living people, but I think that was it. And then they were your neighbors, and they became terrifying.
Well, let's talk about the people who were in the film. Obviously, there were, I don't know what the cast was. Did all of them come from this area, or were there some outside professionals?
No, there were professionals. Most of them came from Pittsburgh. In fact, you're going to talk to one of the only surviving Evans City cast members soon. LMA Smith, but no, a lot of them were our clients. We did a lot of commercial work, and these were our clients realized that we were making this movie. Oh, can we be in it? Can we be in it? We did have professional actors. Carl Hardman and Marilyn Eastman had a very successful radio production company in Pittsburgh, did a lot of work with Reach Cordig and that whole gang back then. Dwayne Jones was living in New York. His family was from Duquesne. He was the lead, Ben, and the way he got it was a friend of George's said, Dwayne's going to be in town. You should read him for the part. He wasn't supposed to be the part. He wasn't supposed to be the actor in the part. Another guy by the name of Rudy Ritchie was supposed to do it. And so anyway, Ben read for the part, or Dwayne Jones read for the part, and George says, that's it, you got it.
Well, in making a movie, you can't really get an overview. You can't get a perspective of what it's going to turn out to be on the screen. Did you realize it was going to be as scary as it turned out?
Didn't really realize that until George started cutting it. George was also the editor of the film, and when you started to see, those cut scenes, it was pretty obvious that it was going to be scary, and in a lot of respects, I mean, it gets it's documentary-like in style. It's Blair Witch way before Blair Witch ever happened. This was a real-life thing that was happening because it was shot in black and white, and because the style of photography and so on. So it felt very real. So.
Well, now, George Romero, I guess, was a pathfinder here, where he was doing something that no one ever did before. Did he realize that he was departing from the standard?
Well, I guess in subtle ways, everyone, including George, did, but nothing overt, I mean, again, I think anytime you go out to produce something or make something new, you want it to be different, And I always say, outside of the fact that it was a very good script to begin with and very compelling, intriguing script, it also came in under the radar on a lot of things. It was a small, low-budget film that, the distributors didn't criticize it. We got one note from the distributor, and that was where Harry and Helen Cooper are down in the basement, sort of having their argument. That scene went on forever and ever, and they asked that be shortened. No mention of the fact that there was nudity in it. There was an actual African-American smacks of a white woman, back in that time. It was amazing and I think that was it. All those little things, coupled with the fact that it was a good story, actually brought something to people that hadn't been brought to them in that respect.
Who wrote the script?
George Romero and John Russo.
Had he ever done that before?
No. The first feature film ever.
Because it's hard to believe that somebody can make a film without having done that before, and then making such a unique film that doesn't follow the guidelines that came before.
Well, I think that's the beauty of independent film. Independent filmmaking still today. A Night of the Living Dead couldn't be made in a studio type system because they have, by page 11 you have to have X happen. By page 22 you have to have X happen. And Night of the Living Dead wasn't made that way. It was made to be scary.
Now, Gary, this building behind us was a very central part of that movie, wasn't it?
Well, it's become a central part. It was actually, so many people didn't know that it was a chapel. They thought it was a caretaker shed because it hadn't been used as a chapel for many, many years, even in 1966, 67 when we shot. But enough Night of the Living Dead fans saw it to say, cool, we're going to get behind it and save it. So that's how it happened.
Gary, it's good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure.
Interesting story. And I think we ought to talk with one of the actors. As a matter of fact, she is the last surviving actor from Evans City who was in the original film, The Night of the Living Dead. Ella Mae Smith was in the original Night of the Living Dead, and she's one of the residents from Evans City that was in The Night of the Living Dead, and she's the last surviving Evans City actor who was in the movie. That must have been some interesting experience. That's your first theatrical experience?
Oh, it sure was, and I think it's probably my last, too.
How did you get involved?
Well, we were sitting in our yard, relaxing, and a car pulled up, and these people got out and said, "How would you like to be in our movie?" My husband said, "No." And I said, "It sounds pretty good, and I had a way of coaxing my husband to do what I wanted him to do. So we went back, and they started slapping stuff on our face and everything, and before you knew it, we were ghouls.
Did you have a speaking part?
No, no,
Just one of the ghouls.
just one of the ghouls.
Did you have any idea what the movie was going to be about when they asked you to do that?
No, I didn't. Whenever I had heard rumors, they told me it was going to be a love scene. And I said, well, naturally, they'll put us in a love scene.
You were a very young person then, and you were being involved with a Hollywood movie. Must have been thrilling for you.
It was the most thrilling thing that I could think of, yes. And I was young. Not anymore, but I was then. But it just never occurred that anything like that could happen in my backyard.
Were there many Evans City people in the film?
There was only 5 of us, and the rest of them, all except Dick Heckard. He was a sheriff, I guess, or something, and he's still living. But I am the last surviving ghoul.
How did they tell you what kind of a part you were playing and what you were supposed to do in front of the camera?
When we went back, I said, what do we do? They said, just grope around like the rest of the pack, and we didn't have to. We did once in a while, said, whoa, but that was about it.
What kind of makeup did you have?
Like we were dead. White, black around our eyes, around our nose and mouth, and like we had been dead for a while.
At what point did you realize what the movie was all about?
Well, we had an idea, we weren't in all the scenes, but we saw them eating the stuff that they were eating and that. And when we went to the premiere, that's when we realized that the movie, and at the end of the movie, it was really gruesome.
Would it be, if you could be objective at this point, would it be the kind of movie you would have gone to had you known what it was?
No, not really. I don't watch those kind on television or anything.
How long did your part last? How many days or weeks?
Well, we went back the beginning of the summer. We weren't in in all the time, but we would go back and watch what was going on. And then if they needed somebody to fill in, they'd say, come on, get in here, and we'd fill in.
What time of the day did it start and how long did the shoot last?
Most of the time it was in the evening. And sometimes we were there till 12:30 at night. Got pretty wet whenever you walked through the grass, because come this time of the year, the grass is wet at night.
Did all of it take place right here at the cemetery?
No, the scenes from the cellar were done in Pittsburgh, in a building that they had in there.
How many days were you involved with the film?
Well, I couldn't say exactly how many days, but it started in May or whatever, and they weren't done until in October around Halloween.
Were you paid for it?
We were paid $25 a piece.
For the whole
Me
thing?
and my husband. Mm-hmm.
Not per day?
But no, not per day.
What kind of a man was George Romero?
He was a very nice man. He treated you just wonderful. He didn't yell. He didn't say any, bad things or anything. He was very nice.
Well, Gary told us that this was his first film. Did he seem to know what he was doing?
Yeah, he seemed to me to know what he was doing because I didn't know what we were doing.
Was it tiring for you?
Sometimes, but they had chairs and things that we could sit in, when we weren't in with them.
Ella May, when you finally saw the movie, it was screened up here. What did you think?
Oh, I don't know. My kids were the ones that really, thought this was terrible at first. But now they think it's wonderful. And what I thought this can't be what we were doing.
What did you think about the way you looked on the screen?
Oh, I was very ugly. Very ugly.
Well, you were supposed to be.
Oh, yes, we were supposed to be ugly.
If you had a chance to do something like this again, would you?
At my age, I don't think so. No. Maybe if I was younger, but...
Ella May, after all this time, looking back, did you ever think at that time that this movie would become as famous as it is and become as a cult favorite as it is?
No, I didn't. But looking back at it now, it was one of the first those kinds of movies that were made. But I have no idea that we laughed whenever we saw some of the things that was going on, but we're not laughing now, I guess, huh?
Ella May, thanks very much. Now let's find out about some of the background, the production background of this film. There are some people in Pittsburgh who were actually processing the film after each daily shoot, and let's talk about that. Once the filming took place here at the Evans City Cemetery for the Night of the Living Dead, it went into a Pittsburgh film laboratory, and Rick Reifenstein was working there at the time. Rick, what kind of work did you do?
I was a motion picture editor there.
So when the film came in, what was the process down there?
Well, they brought their dailies in every day. The dailies were what they shot every day, and they would bring them in to process them and screen them to see, you know, what the results of the day's shoot was.
Who supervised that? Was Romero directly involved with that?
Well, he was there off and on. Mostly it was Gary Striner and John Russo. And I think Russell Striner was in occasionally, but they were the crew. Of course, they were all either on screen or behind the camera in those days.
So when you were seeing the film down there for the first time, did you have any judgment about how good a film it was going to be or how bad a film was going to be?
No, it was hard to tell. It was just seeing bits and pieces of things as it went along. I remember one scene where John Russo in the film got a tire iron through his head, and he was standing right next to me when we were screening the dailies, and I checked to see if he had a hole in his head or not. I made some kind of a comment at that time.
When this film came out, it became an immediate hit, I guess, and it became, of course, even more so as years went on. And I guess that really surprised a lot of you, but it became so popular that you started a festival here in Evans City some years ago. Tell us how that came about.
Well, I was at the barbershop one day, and I looked across the way and saw somebody I thought I recognized, and it took us a few minutes, and I realized it was Gary Striner, and I hadn't seen him in all those years. And so we started to talk about the old days and about the film, and he mentioned that it was coming up on an anniversary, and we said, gee, we ought to do something about that, and we decided to put together a festival, and so that's what happened. We went around and did a lot of promotion and appeared on some of the TV news programs and on KDK radio, and we did a lot of promotion and organized the first Living Dead Fest.
What happened at the festival?
Well, where we held it at on Halloween, it was always bad weather for the next several occasions that we did it. And but Gary had a great big screen, and we showed the movie, and we had a stage and got all the principals up there on stage and interviewed them and stuff. So it went pretty well.
Now, the first time must have been an experimental time, and I know you've done it ever since. There was just one here recently. Has it grown in popularity?
Well, it has, because of the Save the Chapel program, and we've got so many people involved now. Back then, we had a hard time getting Evans City Borough to go along with everything because they just thought it was a bunch of crazy people that were going to get together, and I think we've kind of convinced them over the years that we've got some serious things to take a look at.
Well, there's a whole cult that's built around this Night of the Living Dead, and a lot of them come to the festival. Do they come from pretty far away?
Yeah, we had some people from Europe. In fact, Gary brought to our borough council meeting a gentleman that was from England, and just
came here just for that.
Yeah, just came for that, and I don't think he was the only international visitor. But they wanted to impress on people that people do come from all over the globe to see. To be around this area and the Night of the Living Dead.
It must have been a big surprise for you and so many others to see what's happened to that little film that you guys put together.
Yeah, certainly. Although they had been working on several different films, I think the Latent Image had probably done 3 or 4 different films, but this was the one that caught everybody's attention and developed into something that everybody wanted to see.
And it's made this cemetery famous. I guess there are visitors to here periodically?
Oh, quite a few. In fact, I've been interviewed before on camera by, I was interviewed at least once by a crew from Canada. And anytime anybody comes up and wants to know anything about the cemetery, they generally call me or Gary. So, yeah, there's a lot of visitors come.
Rick, thanks a lot.
You're very welcome.
The Night of the Living Dead, filmed right here in Evans City, Pennsylvania at the Evans City Cemetery. It's one of the ways to celebrate Halloween, I suppose, to think about that movie, to see the movie, and to see haunted houses. And that's what Halloween is all about here in Butler County. I'm Larry Berg. We'll see you next time on Faces and Places.